All right, folks, so you can continue to take the quiz. Those who started, you have 30 minutes to complete it. So people who were here at 2, you have another 7-8 minutes to knock it out. People who maybe came a little bit later, you still have 30 minutes. For the people who came like really, really late, it should still work. You should be able to take the whole quiz. So just as a reminder, like last time, this rest of the class will be recorded, just so I can give some, Dr. Roy can give me some feedback on how this course is going. So when you finish the quiz, mark yourself here in EdSTEM using the normal process. We are going to take a quick step back and look at recap. We're going to look at what we looked at on Wednesday. And we're going to get into looping with ranges. And I think a lot of people had experience with that in the lab yesterday. We looked at break and continue, so we don't need to do that again. And we will look at something called enumerate, and we'll look at the while else. Okay, so as a reminder, we looked at the while loop last week, and we looked at the for loop on Wednesday or whatever. And the key difference was the for loop said, I want to go through a set of items, the collection or the range, which we'll talk about today, and do something with it. From a syntactic perspective, they looked very similar. We had a keyword, while and for, and then we had the indentation and a bunch of code that would be executed if that condition was met or not met. Like I said, end of last class, we did look at the break, which meant break out of that loop, no longer do anything else. Just go back to that outer level of indentation. We contrasted that with continue. And continue meant just go to the top of the loop, but carry on with the next iteration if there was one. Okay. So this was in Zybooks. This was covered in the labs yesterday, but we'll take a little deeper look at looping with ranges. So just like we learned about the length function, the int function, the string function, range is just yet another function. And this function takes a couple of parameters. For the most part, you're really going to pass it 1, maybe 2 parameters. So as the examples are shown here, the range of 5 to 8 will produce a list that has the values 5, 6, and 7. And so notice that it includes the lowest value, so it includes 5, but it does not include the upper value. So it's the number before that. So that's why 5, 8 goes to 5, 6, 7. The third example there, range 0, 5, 2, that second 2 is when you want to go, in this case, by 2s, every other value. So here, this produces 0, 2, 4, right? For folks who knocked out the last assignment, we had to iterate by 10s. So we'll see how we can use that today rather than doing multiplication. And finally, as a shortcut, you can just put 1 parameter, which assumes that you want to start counting from 5. So, or sorry, count up to 5, start with 0. All right, the syntax, and again, it's covered in Zybooks, so I don't want to go too deep into this. Syntax is range. It takes start, it takes end, it takes step, and the end and the step, well, they're all kind of optional. If you don't use them, it will either start from 0, or it will, and go to a certain level, or it will just increment by 1. So going into how we iterate over the range, it's exactly the same how we iterated over a sequence. So we say for, and then we have the variable we want to iterate over, and then the range. And I think I mentioned to a lot of people in lab, a lot of times you end up using I. It's kind of the one place it's kind of cool to use a very succinct variable name. From a semantic perspective, these 2 blocks of code here are equivalent. And I would argue you would want to do the code on the right because it's simpler. And the code on the left, if I want to iterate from 0 to 10, and I want to print something out to the screen, notice all that extra work I have to do. I have to have that variable index. I have to initialize it to 0. Then I have to increment it by 1, right? So there's actually a lot of room for error there. You could, fat finger it, and maybe you do -1, and so like your loop never terminates, right? So with the for loop, it's a little bit more error proof. So just to trace through this, like we did with the for loops in the collection, if I was to iterate over the range 3 to 5 and just print them out to the screen, the first iteration of the loop would say, okay, cool, I'm looking at num is going to have the value 3. That's going to print out 3. The flow of control goes to the top of the loop, and now it looks at the number 4, and it prints out the number 4. The third time around the loop here, it says, okay, wait a minute, my limit was 5. So I've already handled 4, so it drops out of the loop at this point. So we exit the loop. So again, hopefully you're having some appreciation for something I mentioned early on in the course, that off by 1 errors are kind of a big deal in computer science. This is why. A lot of people might think that would actually print out 5, and it doesn't. Okay, let us jump over into EdSTEM here. And let me log in with a better account here. Give me 1 second. Okay, let's get into assignment 5, looping over a range. So here's as simple as it gets. I want to iterate over the range 10. And again, notice that 10 should not be included in this. So I'm printing out whatever I is. So I goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? Again, if you were in lab, that should be pretty straightforward what we're doing there. Here's that example where I have a min and a max. So I want to go from 5 to 10. Fingers crossed, this is going to print out 5 to 9. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Cool. Here's a range where I want to go from 0 to 100 by 20s. Let's run that. 0, 20, 40, 60, 80. Okay, pretty straightforward. And I guess this is the last one. I can actually go backwards as well. So I can go from 100 down to 0 by 20s. So 100, 80, 60, 40, 20, right? And again, notice that second parameter, that max in this case, it's not going to do the second one. It does the first one. Whatever you put as that first parameter, it did 100, but it doesn't do 0, right? So make sure you have a grasp of that. Okay, here's the little your turn stuff. So what we had in assignment 4, we had this song catalog, which is a dictionary where the keys were integers, and those integers went up by 10. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, all the way up to 210. And we have this song tuple as the value. So in this little example here, what I want to do, it looks like, let's iterate by 20. Let's see what that looks like, and we'll print out a nice message. Okay, so I'm going to create for I in range, and I want to, what did my instructions say here? Including 20 up to including 200. So I can do 20, 201, and I want to do it by 20. So my song, I access my catalog dictionary, And how do I access an element in my dictionary? I use this square bracket. What is the key? Well, the key in this case is I. So now I have my song, and I should be able to print out a nice message. So here's my format string, and I want to print out something like catalog ID. And in this case, I could just put I is song dot. And again, I showed some people this. There still seems to be some confusion how we access fields on tuples. But the IDE is here trying to help me out, right? I just entered dot, and it's giving me all the different values on here. So here I can see title, and I can just complete that real quick. So let's run this up. And I have a little hanging quote. So it seems like I get what I want. Catalog ID starting at 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, up to 200, right? So that gave me everything I want. And again, notice that little trick I did there. I put 201. Had I just put 200 there, it would have stopped at 180, which is not what I wanted in this example. Okay, and let's just tie some pieces together with something that we learned in the last lecture, that concept of reverse, right? So let's say I want to iterate this in reverse. Well, I have two options here. And again, this is the creative freedom I hope you all take advantage of. You can start doing things your own way, right? If I wanted to, I could actually do it this way. I can say I want to go from 200, which would be inclusive, and I want to go down to the 20th one. So I'll say negative 19, or pardon, I'll say 19, right? And negative 20 is how I want to step. So let's run that. So this printed out starting at catalog ID 200, 180, all the way down to including 20. So that's cool. That worked. If I want to do something else, I'm going to do exactly what we did on that last exercise. But watch what I do here. I'm going to put this inside the reversed function. So if I run that, look at that. I get exactly the same thing. So it's your choice what you think is easier or less confusing in your program. I don't know which way I would go with this. I think this might be a little bit easier for me to understand, but it's up to you. And actually, there's one little bug here. I said I wanted to go up to 200, and that was 180. So let's just do that. 201. Cool. Now I got my 200 in there. Okay. Let's move on to this next topic here, index and value. So let's say I have a list. Here's a list of items in my basket, paper, rock, scissors. And notice what I want to print out. I want to print out the number 0 and then that value, and that number 1, then that value, number 2, and that value, right? What you would do today, and again, it's a little bit inefficient. It's kind of like that while example we looked at a minute ago. If I'm going to iterate over that collection, if I want to print out that number where I am in the loop, notice I have to create another variable here called count, right? And then I can print out, count an item and increment my count as I go through the loop. So of course, there has to be an easier way. And that easier way is using this new function, another function to add to your list called enumerate. Now the syntax for the for statement changes slightly. So now I say for index comma item in enumerate, and then inside that I put my list. And now look what I get here for free. I get both the index where I am in the loop, and I get the item that's in that collection. So it saves me a little bit of toil as a programmer. And index and item, I can call those whatever I want. I can be kind of bad and say, I1 and I2, but you can put whatever you want in there. And also, I think those parentheses are optional. So as this note says here, what you put in there is really any container, any collection that we've looked at. So it's not just lists. All right, it might be easier to see. So let's go jump back into EdSTEM again. So here I have a list of songs. And again, thank you to everybody for giving me hopefully good music choices. And notice my syntax here. I'm going to iterate over these songs with index and song. So let me run that up. Cool. Looks like it did something good. If I wanted to just say I and S, which I would say is probably a bad practice, but whoops. Let's run that. It works as well. Cool. All right, let's move down then. Part 2, iterating over a dictionary. So now I have a dictionary and I want to iterate over it. So let's use that sort of same pattern, right? What did we do before? We did this, right? We just said songs and songs to artist. But let me change this up and add enumerate. So I'll add enumerate here, and I'll say I and song. And let's just print that I there. Maybe we'll put a tab in. Oops. Let's spell enumerate properly. Okay, so now it printed out where I was in that loop, right? But notice I still had to like access my key, and then I had to grab this collection and put the key in it to get the value, right? So the first time through my loop, it grabbed Right My Wrongs by Bryson Tiller, right? So there's got to be a better way, right? And so, of course, there is a better way. I'm not 100% sure if what I'm showing you next is in Zybooks, but please pay attention to this. This is something that will help you out tremendously when you're looping. So rather than use that enumerate function, this same pattern is applied if I say, using my dictionary, if I call the items function on my dictionary. Now, this probably makes a little bit more logical sense. This is going to give me the key, which in this case is the song, and the value, which is the artist, right? And so now my code is a lot more compact. It's a lot more succinct, right? Likely when I'm iterating over a dictionary, I don't really need to know that order, that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That doesn't really make much sense. So anyways, get used to this. I think it's called unboxing. It's where you do a for loop and you return multiple things, right? When I'm going through this loop. All right, let's jump back over into the deck. The while else, or the for else. This is a construct that is very unique to Python. And initially, when I was, setting up for this course, I found it very uncomfortable. I didn't know why I would want to use it. And I know when I've been doing the labs and doing the homework along with y'all, I've actually found it to be quite useful for a lot of different reasons. And as we go through the course, I'll point those out. But do understand, this is not something that you normally find in other programming languages. This is something that's unique to Python. So what is it? Well, it's not at all what else is when we talked about branching. In this particular case, syntactically, you put an else statement, or you put the else keyword after your loop, after your for loop or after your while loop. And the code inside of there will get executed one time only if you didn't do a break. So if you had a break statement in your for loop and that break statement got executed, then that else would not get executed. If your loop just went naturally through, 1 to 10 or the elements in the collection, whatever, then it would print out that statement. So we're gonna take a look at it. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this because I feel like this is an advanced feature. It's very good for us to have an appreciation of it and know that it exists, but so let's take a look here. So here you can see I have a loop, and this is the same example we used earlier with the guided while loop exercise. So here I have a loop that is going to iterate while I keep going, right? And it's going to say, okay, it's going to use something that I asked the user for. So I'm going to ask the user, hey, do you want to simulate breaking, right? So if I do, I'm going to break out of here. And I should not see this statement printed if I input 1. If I input 2, right, my loop should go through and I should break out naturally. So, and then I should see this print statement. So let's run it up and see. So do I want to simulate a break on exit? Let's say yes, I do. So notice it just said done. Now this time, let me do 2, simulate exit naturally. Now notice what was in that else statement, exited naturally, print it out. All right. And then the other example to look at here was the for loop. So the syntax is exactly the same. Here's my for loop. At the same level of indentation, I have the else. So here I'm going to loop 0, 1, 2, right? And so here, once I get to that last loop, the last time around that loop, if my user said, hey, I want to simulate a break, I'll simulate the break, and ideally, this else statement wouldn't run. Okay, so let's simulate a break. 0, 1, 2, and then done. So my code did what I wanted it to do. Printed out 0, 1, 2, and then left. Now, let's do the other option. 0, 1, 2, exited naturally with no break. So again, I do consider this to be an advanced feature. Highly unlikely I will ask you questions about this, but I think you might find it useful in the assignments and the upcoming projects. That's not like any weird hint. It's just I've found it useful in a couple of different ways. All right. So that brings chapter 5 to a conclusion. So we looked at looping with a range. We looked at the break and continue last time. We looked at enumerate, and we just had a brief intro to that while else. So we covered an awful lot in loops here. There were 12 sections from Zybooks. You can see them here. What should y'all prepare for? So because we're done with this now on Friday, and I give 24 hours, you have until the end of the day, Monday, to complete homework 5. Like I said, we're going to start moving very, very swiftly here. So there will be a quiz on Wednesday on chapter 5. And on Thursday, we will have the assignment 5 is due. All right. So you'll have some time with office hours with me or the TAs all this week to work on assignment 5. And also probably sometime on lab on Thursday. Please start the reading for chapter 6. We will likely finish chapter 6 for the most part on Monday. We might have one section left over for Wednesday, okay? Start thinking about an exam that will be coming up in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. We do an exam every 3 chapters. So once we finish strings, which we should be solidly done with strings by Wednesday, I'll schedule the exam prep. I will hold those extended study sessions, and then we'll have the exam. It'll be the same format as exam 1. Okay, that's everything I have here, folks. So thank you for bearing with the change in schedule here, coming on remotely. I know it brings up bad memories from a couple years ago for some of us. I wish we were in the classroom, but do stay dry, do stay safe this weekend, and we will see everybody on Monday. Thanks for your attention.
Oh wait, question. When is Labs 5 due again?